These are five players that can fix the Toronto Blue Jays heading into next season. And it's not an exact science. We know that about free agency. But the Blue Jays need a little bit of a facelift this offseason, and these players could help with that. So we'll break that down and much more on this episode of Jays Digest. Welcome in, everybody, to Jays Digest. I'm your host, Peter Vryonis, alongside host Nick Gosse. And Nick, we got some sad news yesterday as the Oakland A's are moving away from the Coliseum. Hopefully they can be back. I mean, they still have 3 years before they actually move to Las Vegas. So maybe the MLB and the MLB Player Association can work something out there and keep them in Oakland because that's a very passionate fan base with an owner that just doesn't really care about the team and the product that he's putting out on the field. But they got some young players that hopefully can progress here. And as someone from Montreal, I wasn't old enough to really go to a lot of Expos games, but I know the feeling of having a team ripped away from you. So I feel for all of the people in Oakland, and you could tell that it was a gut-wrenching moment for them yesterday. They were very heartbroken and just not something that you want to see. I'm sure it won't be the last time we see it in Major League Baseball, but unfortunate for them. And hopefully, Major League Baseball could work something out to keep them in Oakland because that's a very proud franchise right there.
Yeah, very disappointing. And a lot of fans out there were disappointed. So hopefully something can work out there. But you mentioned some young players. You mentioned just players in general. The Blue Jays, they need to make some moves this offseason. And the season is just about over. Only a handful of games left. And it was a disastrous season. We all know that. But regardless of how this season went, changes need to be made. And an article dropped revealing some targets that can fix the Blue Jays. I want to hear you guys' thoughts in the comment section. Peter will obviously discuss them as well. So this one is four veteran free agents. We're going to be going over five that the Blue Jays should sign to fix their clubhouse chaos. So clubhouse chaos is a bit of a stretch. I don't know if the Jays necessarily have that. I mean, it's certainly not great. But what I do know is that the Jays definitely need to make some moves. Let's start with the first one here. And we obviously know before we get into the first one that Chris Bassett had some interesting things to say about the front office, say about the Ohtani situation. So a lot of the players that have even been calling for changes. And the first one here is Kyle Hendricks. Now, a lot of these names aren't going to be guys that jump off the page. There are a couple that are very good, but I think these are more realistic options to help complement the team. But Peter, I'm curious about your thoughts on this one. He is 34 years old in the middle of his 11th big league season. He'd help as a veteran, a useful player on the mound if used right. I'm not entirely sold on this guy. I can see why maybe it would help the clubhouse because he's obviously a veteran pitcher. He's been around for a while, but he's just not a good pitcher in the major leagues anymore. So this one's very interesting. But I do think he could have some sort of use, maybe as a guy who can pitch now and then. But I don't think this would be the headlining move. And the moves do get more exciting. This is an interesting start.
Yeah, it is. And the Blue Jays heading into next season have a lot of injuries in their rotation as well. So that could be another reason. It doesn't feel like a dumpster dive necessarily, but Kyle Hendricks he's solid. Like, I don't think he's horrible, but you definitely don't want him frontlining your rotation either. So if they do bring him in or someone of a similar acumen to Kyle Hendricks, it would have to be as a fourth or a fifth starter. So I think it makes sense because the Blue Jays need depth, and we know that you can never have too many arms. Like, look how many pitchers made an appearance for the Blue Jays this year. Like, you won't even recognize if you didn't watch from like games 20 to 140, you wouldn't recognize half of the names or three-quarters of the names in the bullpen right there for the Blue Jays, or even in the starting rotation for that matter. So it's been a tumultuous season, and Kyle Hendricks doesn't solve all of your problems, but at least you know that you're getting some sort of consistency with bringing in a guy who is able to be an innings eater and has had some success at the big league level. Is he dominant? No. Does he have great stuff? Absolutely not. He throws in the mid 80s, but I mean, hey, we've seen the Blue Jays do well with contact pitchers on the mound, especially considering that their defense is pretty good. So I would be open to it, but again, like you said, not as a headlining move. And I don't think any of these are headlining moves. So don't get it twisted that these are the end all be all moves that the Blue Jays are going to make. But getting, let's say, two or three out of these four guys or five guys can really help the Blue Jays get more competitive for next season. But make no mistake about it, you need a headlining move, and whether that's Juan Soto going all in on him or whether that's Alex Bregman, you need to do something of substance. And I just don't think any of these guys provide that level of productivity that the Blue Jays need.
Yeah, there's definitely it's a little better than this, but let us know your thoughts are on this one. And you're talking about productivity again. This one is Teoscar Hernandez, and we obviously
Yeah.
thought about a potential trade. But the thing with Teoscar Hernandez, I still don't think bringing back only Teoscar Hernandez is enough for this Toronto Blue Jays offense to turn from really, really bad to really, really good. They're going to need to make a lot of these moves, like 3 out of the 5, and we're going to discuss these as well as one I mentioned. But Teoscar Hernandez, we obviously know he has familiarity with Ross Atkins. Toronto, he was open to coming back to Toronto at the trade deadline. Ross obviously decided not to bring him back, but I think he could be a phenomenal fit for the Blue Jays if they decide this offseason to aim for some more offense. We know his defense, it improved in Seattle, but it's obviously not great. But he hits home runs, he hits for power, and he provides some protection that we saw back in 2021 when the Jays had one of the better lineups in baseball. I mean, I'm not opposed to this whatsoever. I think it does and fixes a lot of the problems the Jays have, which is, quite frankly, obviously the bullpen. But when it comes to the offensive side of things, he hits a lot of home runs. I do think there are some other options that could also make sense, but you're going to need to add multiple hitters, and I think adding Teoscar could be a good start. They're definitely going to need to do more, which is crazy to say because he had 29 home runs and 90 RBIs last year.
Yeah, well, I think of all the names on this list, Teoscar is the one that can have the biggest impact, definitely. And he would lead the Jays in home runs this year. He has 31 with the Los Angeles Dodgers. He would be second in RBIs. He has almost 100. So, yeah, maybe his defense leaves a little bit to be desired, but we saw how that worked out for the Blue Jays, going all in on defense. And trying to win that way. Like it just hasn't worked in the past couple of seasons. Yeah, Dalton Varshaw's great out there, but he covers so much ground that he can have a left fielder that is maybe a little bit lackadaisical and leaves a bit to be desired defensively. So I'm all in on bringing Teoscar Hernandez back. I have been for the better part of 2 years now, but will he want to come back? Like, how do you not feel slighted at that point? Like, you get traded away from, you're a fan favorite, you get traded away, and you make it known that you want to come back, and they still don't bring you back. So where do you go? You go with the Los Angeles Dodgers, and now you've won your division and probably going to go on a long extended playoff run. I mean, the grass is greener on that side for Teoscar Hernandez. So he clearly made the right choice. Um, he left a situation that would not have been beneficial for team success, and now he's on the Los Angeles Dodgers, who have the best record in Major League Baseball, and he's a big part of that. Like he's not hitting sixth or seventh in that lineup. He's batting right behind Freddie Freeman every single night. He's their cleanup hitter on a lineup that boasts the likes of Shohei Ohtani, Mookie Betts, Freddie Freeman, Will Smith, Max Muncy, you name it. It's one of the deepest lineups in baseball, and Teoscar Hernandez is a massive part of it. So bringing him in back to the Blue Jays and putting him behind Vladdy in that order, I think that's huge.
Yeah, and they struck out on him. Obviously, they didn't re-sign him, or they didn't sign him in the offseason. And then you think back to the deadline the year before last year, they almost, well, they were rumored to swing a deal with him at the time, and they didn't because of various reasons there. So that one's an interesting one. And now JD Martinez could be a coach on the field for the Blue Jays. Now, JD Martinez has been rumored to join the Toronto Blue Jays for a very long time. Like you mentioned, Teoscar is the biggest, probably one of the biggest names that we're going to be discussing today. But JD Martinez is an interesting guy. Again, he provides defense, or not defense at all. He provides power. He's a decent hitter, 114 games with the Mets, 16 home runs, 69 RBIs. This guy's not super exciting. He's on the tail end of his career, but he is a guy that at the same time, if you want to add to this Toronto Blue Jays lineup, you add a guy like this as maybe like the last addition to your team. They're going to have to do so many things that, honestly, I don't hate it for the Toronto Blue Jays to get a guy like Teoscar and JD Martinez. Obviously, not necessarily both of them. Their positional, they'll have to get multiple positions, but I don't hate it right now, even though we had a down year last year. Maybe you buy low, and the Jays were rumored to be in the mix for him the past couple of years.
Yeah, well, I would still prefer Teoscar Hernandez.
Yeah.
He's younger, he's got more power, and I think he fits more what the Blue Jays are trying to do here. And JD Martinez cannot play the field at all. Like I know Teoscar's defense is not great, but he's still athletic and he could still steal some bases. So he provides value in other areas, whereas JD Martinez is going to be solely a DH. And I think on a team with George Springer and Vladimir Guerrero Jr. and Bichette, like you need to have that DH spot be sort of fluid. So bringing in a only DH, I don't know if that makes entire sense for the Toronto Blue Jays. So that's why Teoscar Hernandez for me would be the ideal target. Maybe him or there's another name that we wanted to mention that was not on this list, which is why we said five guys. It was Tyler O'Neill as well, hometown boy who hits a lot of home runs, plays a decent outfield, runs very fast. I mean, the Jays need some outfielders. They need bats in general that can hit for power, and Teoscar and Tyler O'Neill fit those molds.
Again, the Jays once again were linked to Tyler O'Neill last season before he signed with the Boston Red Sox. And one honorable-ish mention, it's the number one spot here. I don't think it's going to do too much for the Jays, but it's Matt Carpenter. And again, we're at the point now where you begin bringing him in for leadership purposes for a young team because they
You
are
be
going to
the
begin.
hitting coach? Can you be the hitting coach, the fifth hitting coach on the roster or something like
Yeah,
that?
maybe just add a bunch of different hitting coaches, but he's not going to play a lot of games if he gets signed. He's not going to do a ton on the field. It's more so what he could do off the field. But like we mentioned, out of these guys, like Teoscar Hernandez is the biggest one here, but you're going to need to add multiple pieces, whether it's Teoscar and JD, whether it's Kyle Hendricks, whether it's, you mentioned, Tyler O'Neill, maybe even a guy like Pete Alonso, a bigger swing in free agency. They're going to need to make multiple moves if they want to compete next season because it's been a disastrous year for the Toronto Blue Jays, and they need to do that. So, any final thoughts, Peter, as this season from hell is coming right now to a close, and October baseball is upon us, and for the first time in a few years, the Jays aren't going to be a part of it.
Well, I'll tell you what, I'm still very excited for the playoffs. A lot of very intriguing storylines heading into October. So I'm going to be locked in on that. But yeah, the Blue Jays have a lot of work to do and they can get started a little bit earlier than expected this year. I know you can't make any moves as soon as the season is over, but you could start planning and set up a contingency plan if those moves don't go according to plan. So the Jays have a lot to do. They got to address their bullpen situation. They got to address their lineup concerns and even some of their starting rotation concerns as well. There are a lot of holes to be filled on this roster, and even if you get three of the guys that we mentioned in this video, it's still not enough. So you need to do more and you need to go above and beyond if you want to have any hope of competing in 2025 because this roster is just not good enough. And you got to hope for some bounce back seasons as well for some guys that just didn't perform up to snuff this year.
Yeah, going to be one of the biggest off seasons in recent memory for the Toronto Blue Jays. We'll keep you updated with all that. So make sure to hit the subscribe button. See you guys tomorrow.